welcome to Fireside Palaver podcast episode 12, I believe. I think so. Yeah, because we did 11. We did 10 and 11 last episode, and so this is 12, or maybe we did 11 and 12 and this is 13. I don't know.
Well, it depends on if you consider, I think we did 10 and 11 as far as Oathbringer.
Right.
But if you include 1899, that could be 13.
Could be, I don't know.
This could be, we're in there somewhere.
How poetic would it be if we started Stephen King's The Wasteland on episode 13? I might have to throw something in the middle there. Yeah, I might have to throw something.
Just be like, what's up? That's it in the video.
Yeah, we need to throw something in there to make
or,
it.
Or, it should be 19 if, all things considered, but.
Probably finish around 19.
You need to, yeah.
But this episode, we're going to be talking about the first part of Wasteland. I don't have anything prepared. You wrote 3 pages of notes.
I have hella stuff prepared.
I don't have anything prepared. I just kind of, I read this super fast. I kind of just wanted to kind of go through and flesh out how I feel. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I kind of wanted to talk about it and flesh out my thoughts on it and kind of prepare myself for the next section. So if you're watching this on YouTube, there will be spoilers for specifically the section bone or it's bear and bone, which is the first section of book
Part
1.
Jake.
Yep. I read this crazy fast, Dave, because I'm at home right now for the holidays, so I'm not driving to work every day. And right. I've just been reading, and I've been reading in really short spurts. So doing family stuff, and then there's a little bit of downtime before we go to the next thing. Then I can sit down and kind of read for 30 minutes, and then I got to get up and I got to go do the family Christmas dinner thing, and then after that I go home and I can read for an hour before I go to bed, and then I got to go. So it's really spread out, but I really found this super easy to read and kind of pick up and put down, and it's broken up into chapters, and chapters are mostly pretty short, so you can kind of read these really quick segments. So it's really good for exactly the type of holiday reading I'm having to do, where I'm breaking everything.
I agree. It's a pretty straightforward. There's a lot of world building kind of in this section. So
I was going to say that. Yeah. One of the things that stuck out in my mind was that I know that I kind of asked you, well, is this one going to be kind of like the second book where you're jumping into New York City and it's more of a modern telling of the story? Cause I really like that. This one is more world building in Roland's world. Learn a lot more about that whole thing.
And you consider that this part is essentially about the chapter, or the whole section is Jake, fear and a handful of dust, and then this first part is the bear and bone thing. Well, the next part is Jake, so Jake's in New York, so kind of not really a spoiler. There's New York is going to be involved. So it's going to, kind of go back and forth all throughout this book. There's all kinds of different things, but you'll get a little bit of everything out of this book. Roland's world building, a lot of background. There's a lot of background about his world in this, and what they call the old masters, and you kind of get what happened thousands of years ago. There's time, jumping a little bit, but the whole bear thing, Roland said this bear's been probably 3,000 to 5,000 years old. It was created by the old masters to guard this portal of the beam. And, now they're in this wasteland, but, 3,000 to 5,000 years ago was you can imagine it's the height of technology, and their technology is beyond anything that we could grasp. They're they're making these beams and these giant guardians, and they're protecting the tower, so to say, and all the like they're making portals to other worlds. So I mean, like their technology is crazy, but then something happens and
I didn't really. That was kind of a thing about the feel that I didn't really expect. Like, I think of these books as Stephen King's version of like the fantasy journey. It's a group of heroes come together and they're on this journey to go to the Dark Tower. And I've seen imagery from the books, having not read them. I didn't realize how much it was like involved in, I guess you could kind of call it science fiction or pseudo science fiction. Like
there's definitely science fiction.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much of that was an element of the series, because like whenever they describe the bear, and it's like this giant bear that's like knocking down trees, and it was like killing these ancient people, and it had like a vendetta against these ancient people. But it also talks about the thing whirling in its head. And I kept thinking, oh, well, because it also talks about the maggots and the infection. So I was thinking, oh, the whirling in his head that's the infection that's making him crazy. It's making the bear like rabid. And then we find out that it literally is like a satellite dish whirling on his head. And then, later on in the chapter, they get to the smaller robots.
Yes.
I just didn't. That completely exceeded my expectations. I did not think that there was like this fantasy book was gonna start out with robot bears, robot snakes, and some square dog thing. Yeah, I didn't expect any of that.
That
really threw me off a little bit. But it was a pleasant surprise. So
what was.
You have like chronologically, you have some notes.
Yeah, just to throw in case we want to reference something. Obviously, we don't need to go straight through.
Yeah, all that. Yeah.
But the one thing I was gonna say, like with the satellite things, like to Roland in his world, like Shardik the bear was like a myth. Like everyone thought it was like an old wives' tale. Like, he talks about how his nanny or whatever would, tell him these stories, and the cook would tell him these stories, and these, they all just thought, it's just a bedtime story. And, what was cool is when they figured out, when he's thinking about, trying to kill the bear because it's trying to get Eddie, he remembers a thing, and it's about thinking caps. And he's like, yeah, you put your thinking cap on.
Oh, yeah.
And that was like, he was like, yeah, that's their external brain.
Yeah.
And, if you shoot the thinking cap on, you're going to kill the thing. And I was like, man, that's just so crazy right there. Like,
yeah.
And then the other thing is once they do, when, it's trying to get Eddie and it charges and, he's like, shoot it, Susanna. And she's like, bam. When they go over and they see the metal plate on its leg that says, property of North Central Positronics, yada, yada.
Which was referenced in The Gunslinger, right?
Yes. That was at the way station that had like the nuclear.
Yeah, the thing that was underground. Yeah.
Is the property of North Central Positronics. So North Central Positronics, obviously.
Yeah.
Has a lot to do with things. And, but, Eddie's like, he sees that and he goes, yeah, I was wrong. This isn't a robot. It's more like RoboCop. And he's like, it's a cyborg. He's like, it's living flesh, but there's like robot parts to it. And, the whole thing about sticking his hand in his eye socket, I was like, ugh, like, maggots everywhere. But so, that's what Roland was like.
The scene where Eddie is in the tree and the bear sneezes the maggots on him.
All over him, yes.
Oh, man. And you know what I thought about? I thought this was going to be extremely bad for Eddie, because
I did too.
I remember how in the first book, it was like the lobstrosities, like right off the bat, like Roland gets like 3 fingers bitten off, his toe bitten off, and it's like, this is how the book starts, and then he has to deal with this for the rest of the book. I thought that Eddie was going to get some infection or something from this.
Right.
And
Those things would crawl on his nose or something like that. And I thought the same thing.
Like basically Stephen King has proven that the stakes could be that high. So like, or like that immediate, So I thought, oh man, this whole book, like Eddie's screwed. He's going to be infested with maggots and be as crazy as the bear. But yeah, that didn't happen. The maggots apparently die as soon as they left the body of the bear.
Right. But this is kind of the start of this whole world building thing where like he tells you Roland tells you that, the tower, like Shardik is the guardian of one beam, and there's all these beams that cross each other, and then at the nexus in the middle of where they all cross is the tower, which stands, and the beams are like holding up the tower. They're like, he talks about magnetism. I think I even put something in there. He says, anyway, he says like it's gravity, like magnetism, and all this, and then the beams are like what brings that all together and binds all those things and helps hold up the tower. And they're on the beam of Shardik, at this beam of the bear.
Like the forces of nature that we know of as gravity and things like that holds the world together and makes space exist in space correctly. In Roland's world, these were all held together and generated and pieced together in some way by these beams and I thought it was I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. Go ahead.
I thought it was interesting that because the thing that I thought about with this whole so they when he sees the bear, he realizes there's a portal nearby, and he knows that if they find the portal, then they just got to walk in a straight line for a very, very long time, but they've just got to walk in a straight line, and eventually they'll find the tower. Well, I was thinking the whole first book is Roland walking for 25 years or something. How is he never, but then they just stumble across this, how is he never walked his way to another portal? How has he never found one of these before? And how does the world exist? He's just been in these weird little reaches between the portals and the lines that the beams.
I always had that same question. And, I think even the last time when we were doing this, I was talking about how was this world a flat earth or whatever.
Yeah,
and then,
I thought you were crazy. I thought you were crazy when you said that, but I understand what you mean now. Because if it were a globe, then the beams wouldn't work the way.
So that's what I thought too. And there's so he's talking about it, and let's see, where is it? But anyway, he's like the beams are, spread out, and they go and they hit the tower or whatever to hold it up. Kind of like if you think about a circus tent, and then the things going out tying it down. That's essentially what those are. Right. And I thought too, because he says they're at the edge of the world, and then Eddie says, "Hey, we're here, but I don't see a drop off."
Yeah, he's one that actually see the edge. Yeah,
and so I'd never noticed that before either in all these, or I just don't remember that. But Roland specifically says, yeah, it's not really the edge of the world. It's more of the edge of the beams. So if you took it if it was, say, the Death Star, you got the big circle and all those beams come out to form the laser, and then it shoots off. That main laser is the tower, and those little lasers coming up are the beam. Well, the rest of the globe is still there.
Do you think the tower is a place on the globe?
Yes, the tower is a place on the globe, and the beams go out just far enough in a circle, but there's still a whole globe and countries and everything else. And my guess is that the beam is on this side of the world. It's in the United States or whatever, and he's from, China on the other side of the globe. And so he's had to make his way around the globe, and he's now finally got to this part. Because I thought the same thing. I was like, how could these people never have run into this? Well, it's just it's so far away. And then there's a part where he tells Susanna, like, we've got a long way to go. And she's like, how far do we have to walk? He's like, I don't know, because the world is getting bigger.
Right. It continues to grow.
Our world, this world is growing. Time is weird. It's slowing down, but the world is getting bigger. So what was 2,000 miles now, we may wind up having to walk 5,000 miles or whatever, depending on how long it takes and how big the world keeps getting.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
So I want to talk about that point for a little bit. So like whenever I thought about, you were talking about the whole flat globe thing, and I was thinking about, well, how is it possible that Roland's never stumbled across one of these portals? But then he, like you said, the conversation with Susanna, I think that the geography of this place is just ever shifting. And so it's just, he even, I mean, even maybe walking in a straight line on these beams are the only place you can walk where it's not shifting. And I thought that was a really interesting conversation, and it solves the riddle of the first book of how he walked through the desert forever. Speaking of the first book,
right?
Another thing is he's getting in an argument with Eddie. Eddie's like, well, there would be earthquakes. There would be, like, I couldn't even explain to you, like, the amount of destruction that would happen if the world was shifting the way you believe it is. And Roland is like, I don't understand any of that. I'm telling you, the world is shifting. Like, I've been walking the face of it for longer than you've been alive, Eddie. Like, I'm telling you, don't question this. The world is shifting. I don't know why. And so
there's several parts where he says that too. They'll question him on something. He'll be like,
yeah,
you know, just about as much as I do about some of this stuff. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of that in this section where he's just like, I don't know. There's a whole bunch I don't know about this world that I live in. I know more than you, but I don't know everything.
Like, yeah, I mean, Larry's like, hey, I didn't even know this bear actually existed until right now. Like,
really, I didn't even know this was a real bear. But speaking of the first book, I really loved, and I hope that they play on it more. That Eddie finds the first book in his dream. So he's reading I can't remember what book he's reading. So
in the dream he's reading the book by Thomas Wolfe. You can't go.
That's right. You can never go home again.
You can never go home again.
And but the first line is the line from the Gunslinger.
The first line of the Gunslinger. So I put that in here somewhere. That's crazy.
Yeah, I hope that comes up more. I don't know if it will, because I haven't read it yet, but I hope it comes up more.
But yeah, like, so we'll talk about his dream a little bit first, and then I want to talk about Roland's sanity or insanity too.
Yeah, let's get into that.
But you know, like, first off, with Eddie and his dreams, he goes to sleep, he wakes up, he's in New York, and he's walking, like, and he's got that book and he reads it or reads the first line and everything. I actually looked it up too, and that's definitely not the first line of that book.
Oh, really? I thought it was the Man in Black.
Well, I'm talking about the Thomas Wolfe book.
Oh,
is completely different.
No, I knew
and
that.
And then, the cover doesn't have the bear and the key and the rose on it and all that stuff. So,
okay,
this is all definitely dream sequence.
Okay.
Which I don't know what the significance of it being a Thomas Wolfe book per se. I know King, in other things, like in his discussions and forewords and stuff, he talks a lot about his influences, and one of them is Thomas Wolfe. So I'm assuming he just, pulled that out of his hat for that. But anyway, so he walks and he's going down the street and everything, and he's being drawn essentially to this place, and he looks and he sees a bum, and he realizes it's Enrico Balazar, and he gives him the book, and he's just like, that's weird kind of thing, and like, but he keeps going. He gets to I forgot what the street was, but he gets to this specific location. There's a deli, Tom and Jerry's what is it?
Artistic deli.
Artistic deli.
Yeah.
And he's looking at it and he's like, he knows, he's like, I'm here. Like he knows that whatever this is, he is here.
Yeah.
And then Jack Andolini comes by, but he's got half his face torn off from the lobstrosities and all this. And he's like, Dada chum, Dada chi, you got the key kind of thing. And he realizes he's holding the key, which earlier when they're having that discussion with Roland about Jake and the jawbone, we'll get to that. He sees a key in the fire, whatever, but he realizes he has the key in his hand and it fits the door. He opens it, steps through, and the door closes behind him and falls away. And he's in this field and he thinks he's in a field full of blood. And then he realizes, no, it's not blood, it's roses. As far as you can see for miles, it's just roses. And then he follows it up, and it goes up a hill. Then he sees the tower. The tower is very interesting.
I really love that imagery, too, because I didn't expect it to be a field of roses.
Right.
The clouds. Like whenever I picture the tower, especially because I had seen the movie, I kind of pictured like desolate wasteland, tower in the middle, beams coming from all sides. I didn't imagine anything as
no, they just totally they actually had beams. I was like, what the hell is that? Like, no, it's you can't see the beams. But
you can't see the beams, people.
Not there. It's a force, not an actual beam.
I really love that imagery though. That was like it was a way of being like, because I think it portrayed like Eddie's like obsession with it. Like I think Eddie is becoming as obsessed and like as Roland was in the first book. Like I think,
and even more so after the dream.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I think that the dream led him to that. I think him seeing that vision, and I think that the reason why it's a field of roses with a clouded sky. I can't remember if he says that it was like an azure clouded sky or what color the sky was, but it seemed like a beautiful scene, basically.
Definitely.
It doesn't seem like this dark, towering, evil, demonic building. You know what I mean? But in a way, it's like so beautiful that it is evil in like a tempting way. Like I feel like it's like this tempting thing, And
one interesting thing structurally about the tower is that you never see really in any other depictions of like towers like this is the staircase goes along the outside of the tower, spirals all the way to the top, and there's windows
spiraling windows
all around. The stairs go along under the windows, but you don't have an indoor. You'd think this whatever it's outdoor, but anyway, like that whole imagery of that, like you said, like it looks. It's beautiful and like the roses and the clouds, and it's just a beautiful thing. And then all of a sudden, the shadow of the cloud or the tower engulfs him, and it turns from this, idyllic thing to there's something ominous, and he sees something growing and coming toward him, and he calls it like cyclopean shape of doom, essentially coming at him. And so it kind of gives you the whole yin and yang of what the tower is. It's this awesome thing, but there's also something really malevolent about it.
It was a really good depiction, and I think that Eddie is becoming as obsessed as. And another thing I noticed about this chapter that kind of fits that same thing is Roland seems like, and I know you know way more about this than I do, but like from my perspective as a new reader to this, feels like Roland is like passing the torch to Eddie and Susanna. Like he seems like he knows that the end of his journey is coming. Like maybe he feels like he's too old, like he's gonna die soon or something. But he's worried about his mind splitting. That's too. Right. Yeah, that's right. And so, I mean, at the end of this section of the book, he actually passes his guns along, which Roland in book 1 and even book 2, I couldn't imagine Roland ever giving up his guns. That was like like a man without his guns, like was like no
Well, you know,
longer a
that's
man. Like I don't
even
know what he said, but he
Eddie
had some
even
saying
says
about
that.
it. Yeah,
Eddie was like that. It scared Eddie because he was
yeah,
like, "What are you doing?" Like
yeah,
he even says, "I've never seen him without his guns, and
yeah,
now he's giving them to me." And but you know, they had talked about it like, "Hey, you know, there's something happening.
yeah,
I'm scared he may hurt us."
yeah.
And then you know, Roland realizes that. But yeah, like the fact that Roland has given up his guns is says a lot about him, but it also says a lot about how far Eddie and Susanna have come as far as becoming true gunslingers, that he trusts them with, you know, that's not a small thing. Those are like, those guns are
Yeah.
a major thing, like more than, you know, just regular guns.
Yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
it's a symbol, like,
Yeah. I wish I could remember I feel like there is a quote from the first book where he talks about how, I mean, it's basically like life itself to him. He can't make it out
yes,
his gun. It's
that's
like
his
part of
father's
his,
guns and his father's father's guns and his father's
yeah.
father's and on down the line.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's a huge thing. And so one of the things that Eddie also realizes is that, you know, he starts having the dream again and then gets pulled out of it because the weird message from Shardik starts going off saying it's going to shut down and all this stuff. But you know, he wants to stay in that dream. He wants to go back to
Yeah.
where he saw the tower and all that stuff. And he
So,
realizes that, you know, he wants to do that, but he also realizes, he even says, like, if I had the opportunity to go back to New York now, I don't know that
right.
I would. And
Yeah.
up until this point, he would have done anything to get back to New York.
Right.
And so it's even more sinking those claws into him. Like he's becoming a tower junkie, like he would
Yeah.
say about Roland, you know, you're a tower junkie. And now he's, you know, he's definitely in there like that.
Yeah. And there's the scenes where he shoots the robots and he puts on the front like he didn't want to do it, but his internal monologue, he talks about how he actually was scared that he enjoyed it so much.
Right.
And I
And he
think,
had to get away from them
yeah,
so they
yeah,
wouldn't see the excitement that he had in doing what he did.
right, yeah. I think that is another. I think that's I don't know if it's a before and after the dream kind of thing. But I think that that is another like, you know, where he's taking over that mantle of now.
Yeah, definitely.
Now I don't know. I guess I shouldn't make a prediction. But I don't know that I
Feel
believe.
free.
Well, I don't know that I believe that Roland is going to die like at the end of this book, and then there's Susanna and Eddie's going to continue without him. Um, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that they're definitely toying with that possibility, and I think that it's more along the lines of because Roland feels like he is like splitting at the seams because he has two sets of memories from the
Love that.
gunslinger.
That's such a cool
It is.
like
It
story
is.
arc.
It
So
is really
cool.
cool. Yeah, it is really cool, and it also practically kind of solves this problem that Stephen King had, where he wrote these books out of time with one another, and he didn't plan on them being sequential, and so he
Right.
had some holes he had to fix, and this fits in the world of the book, and it is like it continues the story. It builds on the story and it gives an opportunity to explore more of this world and of these characters. So it's a perfect solution to a real world problem that he had. What as a side note, I think I've from doing this podcast, I think I've discovered something about myself. When I read books and watch TV shows and watch movies, I enjoy trying to figure out how it was made more than I'm
Right.
like living in that world. You know what I mean? Like my favorite thing about reading a book is like trying to figure out, well, how did the writer come up with this story? How did he piece it together? I like seeing how it's built. And these books are really cool because they were written the way they were, where it was like, you know, made the gunslinger, then eventually made whole Dark Tower world. But they were kind of
Right.
made at different times. And I like the idea that he had to like solve this problem. And
Well, you
so
know,
in,
there's a in that foreword, So if
I didn't read the damn forward. I didn't read it.
so like, he did the gunslinger, and then years later decided that that was going to be the jump off for his grand magnum opus, thing. So he does the next few ones, and then he had the accident where the guy hit him,
Yeah,
and he
when did
almost
that
died.
happen? Did that happen?
That was 1999. So that was after the fourth book.
Oh, okay, so we haven't gotten to that part in the series
Right.
yet. Yeah.
So like he said that anyway, he's talking about like that, and then he's also talking about how there was a lot of, he would write a Dark Tower book, and then he would write all these other novels, and then he would kind of be like, oh yeah, I got to get back to this, and then he would write a book. Well, he said he started getting he got a letter from a lady who was like 90 something or whatever.
Oh, no.
She's on her deathbed, and she's like, I just want to know like what happens.
Yeah.
And then he said he got a letter from a guy on death row in like Texas or somewhere saying the same thing. He's like, I'm gonna be executed. I want to know. And then he was like, his thing was like, I would love to have written them back and told them. It was like, I don't know what's going to happen to him.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like, and then once the accident came, and I think he picked up the next book about 2 years after the accident. He wrote the next couple books. Like the last two, I think, came out almost back to back. It was like he realized that, this is it. This is my big thing, and I've been farting around and not working on it. And he's like, I want this. He's like, nothing's guaranteed, so I need to kick this into high gear. And he did. And of course, the last two books were freaking huge. So like,
I love hearing
but
about
anyway,
the process.
Yeah. Like if you ever want to read a cool book, he has a book called On Writing, which is basically an autobiography of his writing process. And it's really cool about how he gets ideas, how he writes, how he does all. And like, if you're anybody who's out there who's a potential writer for novels, highly recommend it, because like it's not only entertaining, but it's actually pretty factual about what you need to do to be a writer.
I think I could be like on a writing team, but I don't think I could.
Yeah, I could too.
Right. I don't think I could be like a Stephen King or somebody that writes all the dialogue, all the characters. I don't think I'd be able to do that.
Our next podcast idea is we write a story.
Yeah.
And podcast about our. But getting back to it, like,
so that problem that he had to solve. So Jake dies in the first book, and then Roland goes on to meet the Man in Black, and then I'm a little fuzzy on all this, but he basically puts him to sleep, but he sends him to all these different worlds and stuff. But then when he wakes up, the Man in Black has been dead for like 100 years or something. So he takes his jawbone. Well, Roland has those memories, but he also has mixed in memories, a version of history where that didn't happen. He never ran into Jake. That he did run into the Man in Black, and he did go through that whole thing, but he didn't take the jawbone because he didn't have any reason to. The reason why he took the jawbone was because he had given Allie, was that her name?
Well,
he gave Jake Allie's jawbone, right?
Well, so there's the part where they're at the way station, and Jake's like, there's something in the basement. There's probably food down there, but there's something down there. I don't want to go down there. And Roland goes down there, and he says it's a speaking demon.
Yeah, so I guess it was
but it's in her voice.
Right, that's why
it's
I thought
Allie's
it was her
voice. Okay. And then like he plunges his hand into the wall and pulls out a jawbone, which then he later gives to Jake and says, keep this for safety purposes.
Yeah.
And then later, once he thinks it's, once he doesn't need it anymore because he's dead, he throws that away. But then when he comes across the Man in Black, and he, after all that, he sees a skeleton, he pulls that jawbone to replace the jawbone. So in the timeline So when they go to New York,
Yeah.
in the last book, and Roland takes over Jack Mort, Jack Mort walks up behind Jake, and he's going to push him, and Roland kind of stops him, and he says he saves his life there, but he's like, that's not really the day that Jake was supposed to die. But he knew that was the person that would eventually kill Jake. Well, you get to the end of the drawing of the 3, and they had the whole thing in the subway where Jack Mort's on the tracks, and then, Roland jumps out of the way and kills Jack Mort. Well,
right.
At that point, Jack Mort can't go later to kill
Jake. Yeah.
He can't push Jake. So therefore, Jake doesn't die. And therefore, if he doesn't die, Roland couldn't have seen him at the way station. So Roland's memory is that he just shows up at the way station, spends the night, goes on, eventually meets the man in black, and he doesn't take the jawbone, but he has the jawbone.
He could.
And he's like, the reason he took the jawbone was because he threw away the other jawbone. But he was like, I never would have thrown away the other jawbone and taken the jawbone because I never did it in the first place. Yeah. So then that paradox starts coming together where he's got 2 memories. One where his main memory where he never meets Jake. And now this other memory is cropping up saying, oh, I did meet a boy named Jake and I sacrificed him. And, he starts having like dreams where he's, yelling out, go then, there are other worlds than these. And he's yelling out Jake's name and stuff. And
he's, I remember the part where Eddie says like, you couldn't bring yourself to kill him twice. Oh yeah. In the drawing of the 3. So the reason why he intervened was because he couldn't let
Jake die.
Yeah.
And he knew that Jake needed to die.
He could let Jake die. He couldn't let him die twice.
He couldn't let him die twice.
Yeah, but because I guess because he carried guilt from the first time, maybe.
Right.
And this is an interpretation. I don't think they.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely.
That's kind of what Eddie kind of hints at whenever he says.
Right.
He
but
says
I don't think
some smart ass Eddie quip about him being.
Yes.
Every time I think you might be human, or every time I think you might be a robot.
Might be a robot. Yeah.
But
yeah, so like he can't. He knew what he was doing, but they kind of made it seem like it was almost on a subconscious level that he.
But then they come to
was doing that to
but then he decides, well, even if I hadn't stopped, Mort. What was his first name? Jack Mort. Even if I hadn't have stopped Jack in the time I entered his mind, that wouldn't have been the time because he probably would have been wearing a disguise.
Right, because he was dressed as a priest.
Right, and
when Roland took over, he wasn't dressed as a priest.
Right, and then Eddie said, well, there couldn't have been, but then there was some speculation about, well, the man in black could have been manipulating, but then Eddie says, but he died. He was dead at this point in your history. The man in black had already died, so he wouldn't have been like doing any more manipulating.
And he also said that like because I think it's Susanna says, well, after Jack Mort died, why couldn't
exactly.
the man in black
just got somebody
else to do it? And and basically he said the same thing. Well, in that time frame, he would have been dead, but also the man in black wants
he would have
happened.
Yeah,
he wants Roland going crazy. That was kind of the whole point, was like Roland's degrading, and the man in black's mission is to stop Roland from completing his mission to the Dark Tower, and this is a way to do it.
If that line of thinking is true, then the man in black would have died believing that he succeeded, because if he really had plotted it in that way, then he would know there's nothing Roland can do without causing some sort of time split conundrum where he's gonna drive himself crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Thinking about that now. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense.
So again, I said earlier that there's a ton of foreshadowing. This whole thing is like a huge like foreshadowing of different things to come. It's amazing to me how writers, we talk about how Sanderson sets things up and King's the same way, like how he's setting things up now for books that are way down the road, and you're just like, when it happens, you're just like, holy shit, like really, like wow. So there's one of those moments to come at some point,
Okay.
and I won't tell you.
Oh, I guess the last thing I could think of to touch on about that whole subject is so not only is Roland not willing to kill Jake twice, but if he has two sets of memories, is Jake existing somewhere where he has a memory of himself dying and not existing anymore, and then one, and how does that affect his life? Like in what state is he in now? And I kind of find this like Roland has been so just like one task focused for two books basically, that I find it surprising, although I'm going to explain why I don't think it's unbelievable, but my initial reaction is that it's surprising and it seems outside of his character to even be concerned with what Jake is going through in some other world. But I think that the drawing of the three has changed all three of these characters.
Oh, definitely.
I think that they are they're a Ka-tet, but they're kind of blending now. Like, I think that Roland maybe has sensibilities about things that he's gathered from Susanna and Eddie that he wouldn't have had before.
And, the whole thing with him, it kind of starts when he actually, because he fights the choice of letting Jake die, because even back then he's like, I could just turn away from the tower and raise Jake as my son and lead a normal life and all this stuff. And he kind of fights with that. And then when he meets Eddie and Susanna, I think the more and more humanity, because I think there's one part where he says, I've been alone for so long, like, I don't know, like, how to interact with people anymore. And so I think that is a contributing factor. And now he's got a second chance and he sees that, there's Jake is alive in some other world. Is there a way to fix this? And he's same thing. He's not going to let him die twice. He can't do that. And so, I think he's trying to redeem himself somewhat, but I also think he cares about Jake. I think he not learned, but those feelings grew in the first book where, he had that connection with Jake where he could think of him as a son.
Yeah.
But then the tower was just, at that point, was just still so overpowering in his mind that, he wasn't going to give it up. But now,
if you remember, my first review when we read The Gunslinger was like, I said, I don't even think this guy's the hero. I almost feel like we're watching a reverse story. Like he's the villain of the story that we're watching. And over the course of the drawing of the three, and then his character has changed now that I see him as more of a heroic character. I think he is, and again, it goes back to practically the written at different times, but I think that there's been the drawing of the three does a really good job of bridging that gap of the Roland you see in the first book to the Roland you see now in the third book.
Right. Definitely. He, his character is definitely grown.
Yeah. I love the drawing of the three. Drawing of the three was a fantastic book.
Yes.
And I like that we're seeing more. I thought I was going to be disappointed that this was more of like Roland's world, but and I see what you're saying about they're going to be going other places, but like I this This feels like a sequel to Strong of the Three, though. It feels right reading it.
Yes.
Not disappointed.
One of the things that he talks about too, which is kind of the first time it's mentioned, is Ka,
Yeah.
which you said earlier, Ka-tet.
Yeah, he talks about it. He talks about it a good bit, which I knew a little bit just because you're always talking about Ka. Even before we did this podcast, you would talk about Ka, and I'd be like, "What the hell's Ka?"
So Ka is like destiny.
Destiny, yeah.
But it's he. What does he say?
Fate.
It's destiny, but it's more complex.
Yeah.
And then Ka-tet is many.
Your destinies are bound together. Like your destinies are bound in some way. Like the crew of Oceanic Flight 815 was a Ka-tet. They didn't know it until they landed on the island together. But the moment they got on a plane, they were entering.
Yes. And so like one of the things is, it's one from many. And so they're starting to come together. Now he sees them as his Ka-tet, and he talks about his friends from before, which were like Alan Johns and Cuthbert and Jamie DeCurry and all these friends that he had that he did all kinds of adventure with when he was younger. And he sees, them as being like, he always says Eddie and Cuthbert are basically the same person. And Susanna and I think it's Elaine are like essentially the same person. And, to him, that was like, you get a little bit about it in the first book when they're talking about them training and stuff when they're younger.
Yeah.
That's close to a family, even more than his family, his actual family that he's ever had. And he sees that family coming back. And that's why he's going from this solitary, like grumpy, crotchety guy now to, hey, I've got a chance to have a family again. But he also knows, and even Eddie says, he's like, yeah, this is a lot like that. But what happened to all of them? Like, they all died. And Roland knows that too. He's like, if we continue, he knows in his mind, if we continue in this, and there's a part where he says, there's death to come and loads of death and lots and lots and lots of death. And it's like,
yeah,
a little foreshadowing as well. There's a lot of death coming, apparently.
I didn't think about, again, I didn't consider that aspect of him seeing that he could have that back again as also being a reason his character has changed. I didn't consider that.
And, he's, he's just you see more of the humanity coming out. There's the part where, they're getting ready to go somewhere. They're getting ready to pack up and they're going, and Roland's like, oh, don't forget this. And Eddie's like, come on, man. And he's like, okay, yeah. And don't forget this. And Eddie's like, really? And then he says, and don't forget this. And like, Eddie kind of looks at him and he's like, I was just kidding. And like, Eddie's like, holy crap. That was like, Roland told a joke. Like,
yeah. That's actually how Baron Bone ends. That's at the ending. Because he's like, he gives him his gun, and then he gives him his knife, and then he's like, and there's one more thing. And
there's one more thing.
Yeah, that was like whenever the Terminator tries to tell it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I don't know. Was there anything else you want to cover in that first section, or?
Well, there's one thing that, and it's the part where Andolini and Jack are talking, and it's like, it's right after, like, when he's in there and he sees that shadow coming and everything, and then he hears Andolini's voice, and I wrote the quote down, and he says, 1,000 worlds, Eddie, 10,000, and that train runs through every one. If you
Yes.
can get it started, and if you do get it started, your troubles are only beginning
Yeah.
because this device is a real bastard to shut down.
Yeah.
So,
And there's a train on the cover of the book.
so there's a train on the cover of the book, which I was going to
Yeah.
say. So it's not much of a spoiler, but again, like this is
Yeah.
like such good
There's got to be
like
a train in this thing.
setup.
Yeah.
And like
So I had one thing I was going to bring up. I was surprised that they didn't explore the portal more. You know, they get to the portal and they're just like, screw that. We just needed to know where the portal was so that we, could know what direction to walk. And I was thinking they're going to look. I was thinking the whole time because they kept talking about the yellow and black striped black box, and it looked like I want to say they wanted to
subway. They said it was a subway, like
yeah. So
entrance.
I was thinking they were going to go downstairs and find a train, and they were going to the train runs in a straight line underground. This is how we get there, kind of thing. But then they didn't. They just started walking, which was really neat, by the way. How they figured out where the beam was and all of that. That was pretty cool. But like a natural part, like in the land, like everything's kind of growing, like at this part, or like a fishbone shape.
She said it's like a part in your hair, like everything's just. Yeah. And even in the sky, every birds don't want to fly across it.
I think that's another reason that the world could be shifting. Like, what if things are kind of growing out of this part, and they really would be kind of expanding between the beams? But all this, turtles all the way down, kind of thing. It all goes back to like different ways you can interpret this.
Speaking of turtle, so they talk in one other thing. They talk earlier about the different guardians, and Roland's like, I can't remember all of them. There's like a bear, there's like a fish or something, and whatever. And he's saying, and then there's a turtle, and he reads the
poem about the turtle.
About the turtle.
Let's see if I can find it.
He's like, see the turtle of enormous girth, on his shell he holds the earth. Oh gosh.
I can probably.
I
just found it.
It's pretty close. Yeah,
see the turtle of enormous girth. On his shell he holds the earth. His thought is slow, but always kind. He holds us all within his mind. On his back, all vows are made. He sees the truth, but mayn't aid. He loves the land and loves the sea, and even loves a. Sounds like a nursery rhyme.
Right. So that, if you want a little Stephen King connection,
okay,
other book connection. So in It, the same turtle and poem are become relevant in that book. The theory of the turtle, not just in Stephen King, but of that, there's all kinds of lore about the turtle. In the lore is that the turtle throws up the universe essentially and creates everything. And so the turtle is definitely a big part of Stephen King's, not just Dark Tower, but it's a big part of his encompassing world. And he's not the only time you'll ever hear about the turtle. And I know it's mentioned a few other times. The most prominent one is in It, but so that the turtle is another thing, which is a lot of foreshadowing. Okay. It's just amazing. So you keep your eye out for turtle references and things like that. And same thing with when we talk about the North Central Positronics and like all that, that's like again, that's a lot of world building. There's this company that is apparently so far advanced that they can do things like this, like
they become like a worldwide monopoly, apparently.
Right. And then basically, like, I've always been confused in some of these things. but the old master. So like essentially, it's like the world thousands and thousands, 10,000, 20,000 years ago evolved to this point where they were able to do crazy technological things, and then something happens, and the world is, as they say, moved on, and then the world builds back up again, but there's remnants of these old, what he calls the old masters, like the way station and nuclear things and vehicles, or just random things, but everything else, it's like they never evolved back. They went back to the Stone Age essentially.
Yeah.
And then they moved forward to the part where it was kind of turned into a Western type society. But
like a desolation of some sort.
Right, it was a desolation of some sort. And what when he talks earlier about Shardik, and he's these people that were invading Shardik's woods, and he would go and destroy them. He said that those people were most likely the slow mutants that were in the mountain that had tried to. Yeah, he was like they probably tried to escape Shardik because that they're not that far from that area.
Yeah.
And like those people were just stunned as I guess they contracted some sort of
they were like
disease
a way more
of
primitive.
some sort.
Yeah.
And they I guess they sought refuge inside that mountain and just never. They were so scared of Shardik that they never came back out of the mountain, and now there's some weird.
Yeah, and it was like pitch black in there, so they probably
black and
evolved in some strange way.
Yeah, exactly. Could see in the dark and whatever else, but and then really the only other key thing, pun intended. Is the jawbone. So Roland says he has. When they're sitting around the fire talking about all this with Jake and everything, he hears a voice telling him to throw the jawbone into the fire. He does, and it bursts into flames like fireworks. Well, just Roland and Susanna, it was just fireworks, but Eddie sees a key, and he knows for some intuition tells him, hey, you remember what this key looks like.
Yeah.
And remember it in detail. And then it morphs into a rose. And then he knows that, that yes, this is definitely an important vision. And, he had started whittling previously, and then he goes through the whole thing about how his brother used to make fun of him for various things like that. And,
I wanted to touch on that for a second. So like that comes up again, that comes up a few times in the book, and he's like hearing his brother now still like ridiculing him for decisions he's making and things, because I liked how they talked about how like his brother basically did that as a mechanism to he didn't want Eddie to realize that he was better than him at some things.
Right. And even though Eddie realized it, he didn't want to accept it either.
Right.
He was better at basketball. He was better at games. He was better at school. He was better at most everything than his brother was. But he held himself back out of some weird obligation that he thought he had.
Yeah. Yeah.
From his mom and from Henry.
I like that. I don't like it, but I like how that story element now is in play. That like even though Henry like died in the previous book, he's still here in some way because Eddie's still carrying that baggage. Which I sent you that quote where Eddie says, "Beating heroin was child's play compared to beating my childhood." Yeah, yes. I read that and I stopped and looked up and I was like, God damn, if that ain't true.
Yeah, no, right? That was not that I've ever done heroin.
I've never done heroin, but yeah. I can imagine like little things from your childhood that you just think about for the rest of your life, and how that compares to an addiction like heroin addiction. That was such a smart statement.
And it shows that whole thing too shows you a lot about how Roland has come to understand him as well, because they stop because Eddie sees a piece of wood, a branch, and he's like, he's like, can we stop? And then he feels ashamed because he wants to get this piece of wood. And so Roland's like, stop listening to the ghosts or whatever and stop feeling ashamed, kind of thing. And like Eddie's like, what is this guy, a mind reader? Like, how's he knowing all this stuff? And it just shows you how much Roland and Eddie have come together and really know each other.
One final thing, we gotta wrap this up. We're right at an hour now. The dream thing. So whenever he wakes up and says that he had a dream or whatever, but he doesn't want to talk about it, Roland is like, was there something important in it? If there was, you would let me know, right? Like, Roland knows that he saw something in his dream that was important, and he trusts that Eddie will tell him whenever feels like the time is right. But I thought about that when I read that part. I was like, I bet this is like Roland has probably been having these dreams forever. And like Roland knows that, like, now that they're all in the car together and they're all like on the same focus, and that they likely have begun to get glimpses of the desire to reach the tower in the same way that Roland did. I think that Roland he knew intuitively that Eddie's probably beginning to have the dreams that he's about the tower and about seeking the tower, and how sometimes there's truth in there's clues in those dreams. So, they need to communicate that. I thought that was another cool
Yeah,
moment.
definitely. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there any last thing you want to touch on? There's
no, I think
there's
we
a
pretty
lot.
much
I know
covered
a lot happened.
Yeah, there is, but I
I
think we pretty much cover all of it. I mean, now they're on the path of the beam to going to wherever, to the tower.
Yeah, and I haven't even read a word of the next. He and Rose. I haven't even read a single sentence of it. So I see right off the bat. It looks like it's jumping right into Jake because the first sentence.
There you go.
So I'll start that tonight. I'll start picking that up tonight, and then once we get to the end, we'll do another update. I wanted to bring up two more subjects to you. One, it's the end of the year. Did we do like an end of year podcast, like best and worst books of the year kind of thing? The only thing is, though, is every book I've read this year has been on the podcast. You've had other stuff you haven't read, or you've had other stuff that we've not talked about, but you got me started reading again about midway through this year, and I think everything that I've read we've discussed, and so I don't really have much I can add.
Right.
But I definitely have a book that was the worst of the year. I have a book that I quit. I have a book that I finished that I just finished it today that was worst of the year, and I have a book that I just gave up, like couldn't get through it. And so I could put those as my worst, and then my best would be something we talked about on the podcast. But do you want to do that? You want to do like an end of year best and worst stuff? Maybe I'll surprise myself. Maybe there's something I read that didn't talk. Oh, there's the Star Trek trilogy, which I had already read 2 of, and I read the final. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, we'll come up with ideas. That's definitely a good idea.
And then the second thing is I got a gift card for Books A Million, and I've already bought every book of the Sanderson series that we're reading. And I've already bought the next couple books of the Stephen King series that we're reading. I said, what am I going to spend this gift card on? So I bought the first Wheel of Time book. So I don't know if you're interested in reading that, but I went ahead and picked it up. I figure at some point I will read it, and there's like 14 of these books. So
yeah, exactly.
I can buy them slowly over time until I have a full collection. But
I've heard it's really good. I mean,
what I've heard about it, I listened to some podcasts today talking about it, like a spoiler-free review kind of thing. What I've heard is that the first book is kind of like I don't want to say cliche, but like it's really similar to the Lord of the Rings, which I don't know what that means because I've read the Lord of the Rings, but I haven't read this book yet. I guess it's just a group of adventurers get together and they're all on the same journey together. But then it kind of changes your expectations in the second book, and it goes on a different path than what you thought it was. Then it hits a real lull in the middle, and then it gets really good again at the end. So I don't know, if we decided to do it, we'd have to kind of know that we're going to hit this like sprint, between like book 2 and 6 or whatever. But then we're going to hit this like lull. We're like trying to get to the end, and then it ends with Sanderson. So
yes,
that's why I'm most interested in it, is because I want to read another author. I feel like we have been just reading Sanderson and Stephen King. I don't know enough other authors, especially in the fantasy genre. And so I just thought, being that Sanderson fans like this series, I would pick it up. So, yeah, so I'm excited to read the part 2. And, all right, get together. Right, yeah. We'll get together next week, or we'll get together whenever. We got to do 1899.
Episode 2. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to see what you thought about that episode.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I watched it, but I want to watch it again, and we'll.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Well, peace out, everyone.